Listen, sorry to interrupt, but it really is important for us. If you can just hit the like and subscribe button, that allows us to bring you the very best financial intelligence and the best guests on the planet. Anyway, appreciate it. Like and subscribe.
Welcome back to Real Vision Pro Crypto. I'm Ash Bennington. It's election day here in the United States, so we're unlocking this special episode to all Real Vision members. Today, we're going to be discussing what the future of crypto could look like after the election. I guess whenever that may be, we should say, with things knotted up here really tight in the polls. I'm joined by two returning guests today. Perianne Boring, founder and CEO of the Digital Chamber of Commerce, and Chen Arad, founder and chief experience officer at Solidus Labs. We also have a Real Vision debutante with us today, Lee Bratcher. He's the president of the Texas Blockchain Council. Welcome to Real Vision, one and all.
Thanks, Ash. Great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Well, it's great to have you here, perhaps on the day of the most contentious election in my lifetime, at least. Let's just go around the horn, get the 50,000-foot view of where we are today here on Election Day, where crypto is, and what we might see coming in the future. I'm going to go in the order that I see you guys in on my screen, which is to you first, Perianne. Where are we right now?
Well, today's a very exciting day in American history because today we get to choose if we're going to elect the first pro-crypto and pro-Bitcoin president of the United States of America. It's really historic. I've worked in this space full time for just over a decade, and even 4 years ago, crypto and Bitcoin was not a topic of national political discussion. So just to see how far we have come in just 4 years is a huge accomplishment, and it really shows that crypto is here to stay. I truly believe that the crypto voter is the majority. We issued a poll, a survey just a couple of weeks ago, really talking about who the crypto voter bloc is. And it's much more powerful than I think most people could have ever believed.
Very interesting. By the way, we're going to talk more about that survey in detail because there's some interesting tidbits for this election and for crypto more broadly. Lee, over to you. What's your view down in Texas?
Yeah, I agree with Perianne. It's a consequential day in American history for a lot of reasons. In the digital assets industry, it is almost, we have a sense that we've won no matter what happens. Obviously, I think the industry really does want to see a Trump administration based upon who he would appoint. But the broader, elected officials across the country are realizing the force that this industry has. It is a very bad idea to get in the way of innovation, especially technological innovation. We have a term for that. It's Luddites. And so no matter what happens today, I think we will see movement on perhaps stablecoin legislation, market structure legislation in the coming years, even if there is a Harris administration. I think indicative of that is just how far digital assets, voters, and PAC funds has swayed the election in Ohio, with Bernie Moreno closing a huge gap. Even if he does not come out victorious today, that was very consequential. And a lot of folks took note that there was a 6 percentage point gap closed in a matter of months, which is pretty much unheard of.
Chen Arad, over to you. Big picture thoughts. Where are we today and where are we headed?
I'll add to Perianne's point that it's a historic day in America. It's not only in America, the world is watching, everywhere around the world. Everyone cares about American elections broadly, and crypto world is specifically watching because, needless to say, people have been quite frustrated with the slow movement of things here. I'll say this. I think that no matter who gets elected, things are going to be different in the next election. And that is because of what both of my co-panelists here really emphasized. Crypto is it took center stage in this election. It's not, a coincidence. It's because people care about this. It's too important, to be held back for partisan or political reasons. I believe that whatever happens, it's going to look completely different after the election. We're going to start seeing progress. and that the US has a huge opportunity actually, to learn from what other regulators around the world have done and build the best possible environment for digital assets in the US, and everyone will flock here.
Hi, Raoul here. Listen, I think we've got until 2030 before the economic singularity arrives. Now, it might not be the exact date, but it's around then. So we have about 6 years to figure out how to unfuck our future. I've put together a report to help you called Prepare for 2030. It's going to help you take the first steps in that journey to make sure you're secure past 2030. So just click on the link below and start your journey now.
Well, Ken, that's so well said. And to your point about how everything is going to look dramatically different after the election, it's weird for those of us in the news business. We're doing the show here at about 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. And as we look at this, we know we're going to get an outcome at some point, maybe not tonight. In fact, probably not tonight. Let's just talk a little bit about where we are right now. The polls, I alluded to this at the top of the show, just incredibly close. I was reading Nate Silver's forecast last night at around 12:30 when he did his final model, and he shifted, and it's something like 49-51 in favor of Harris at this point, which is a bit of a reversal. But the bottom line is, whether it's 48 or 52 or 49-51, this is incredibly, incredibly close. As anyone who watched the 2016 election remembers, it is very, very difficult to call this from polls. If you want to take a look at the betting markets, I think we've got a screenshot of that live right now, either Kalshi or Polymarket. What you can see there, well, there's the chart. I don't know if we can zoom in a little bit, but what you can see on that chart is the spread starting to open up a little bit in favor of former President Trump there in recent days and hours. But again, to your point, Chen, it is a moment of uncertainty right now in markets, but also obviously in the state of the world in terms of what's going to happen when we see someone inaugurated on January 20th. So as we try and frame out all of this uncertainty, Perianne, I want to throw it back to you. I alluded to it again at the top of the show, the survey that you did looking at where people land from the digital asset perspectives. Highlight some of your key findings, explain the context of the survey. Let's start with this. Why did you do it? What were you hoping to get out of it?
Well, we really wanted to understand who the crypto voter is. There's been a lot of talk for many years about these single issue crypto voters. So we really wanted to understand, well, what does that block really look like? Who are these people? What does the demographic look like? Where are they located? How much impact can they have in the election today? And what we found was really amazing. And I think beyond what most people would have even predicted. What we found is that 1 in 7 likely voters, not 1 in 7 registered voters, these are your active voters, the people who actually show up and participate in the political process. 1 in 7 active voters are what's in the crypto voter block, which means crypto is an extremely or a very important issue in determining who they will vote for in the polls. That's over 16% of our active voters across the United States of America, or over 23 million Americans, which is why I say crypto is the majority. We are the majority, and we have the power at the polls today. All we have to do is show up and participate.
Well, let me understand what that means. You're saying 1 in 7 likely voters is a crypto voter. What does that mean in terms of their preference? I mean, obviously, we all have a whole series of issues that we care about that we vote on. You're not going to agree on every candidate about everything, but how does it mean they're going to vote? Or do you have a sense of that from the polling data?
Ash, that's a great question. So what is also unique about the crypto voter is that it's very nonpartisan. Crypto and blockchain technology has been a nonpartisan issue for many, many years. It really wasn't until the Biden administration came in and empowered Senator Elizabeth Warren to do this massive witch hunt against the crypto industry that turned this a partisan issue just in the recent years. But for the past 10 years, before that, this was not a partisan issue. It brought people all across the aisle and the political spectrum together. And that's exactly what we saw in our national survey, that both Democrats and Republicans polled very, very similarly. So we didn't poll, is crypto voting red or is crypto voting blue? What we found is that the crypto voter block is purple.
Really interesting. Lee, you want to jump in there and pick up from that? I know that you guys must be watching this election down in Texas. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So the Texas likely voter, is actually, and the likely voter that owns crypto is actually more likely to be a Democrat than a Republican, which is a unique finding that we found in our polling. The future of the Democratic Party is not Elizabeth Warren. It is people like Richie Torres, Ro Khanna. There's so many talented elected officials that are really smart on these issues that are coming to power and will eventually have committee chairs. Unfortunately, the way that the system works in DC, seniority is quite important. So we do have some time before folks like that are in those committee chairs, but they do have outsized influence within the broader party because the party apparatus knows that Elizabeth Warren is not going to be around forever, and she's in the waning years of her career. And if you notice during her debate, the senatorial debate, she really softened on the issues. And you could tell that there had been some pollsters and people in her campaign that got in her ear beforehand and said, do not look like you're attacking crypto. There's no votes to be won there. There's only votes to be lost. And so I do agree that this is a purple voting demographic. There's certainly, I think in this election, probably going to be more pro-crypto folks that lean to the Republican ticket just because what has been said over the last 12 months and perhaps what hasn't been said on the Democratic side. But I think in future years, that is up for grabs. And I think these voters are really more about innovation, about the United States taking a pro-innovation stance and enabling business and human flourishing and not really getting into the weeds of some of the other partisan issues that typically divide us.
Lee,
Yeah,
I noticed the same thing. I definitely took great interest in how Senator Elizabeth Warren has really changed her tone when she was at the podium talking directly to her constituents during the Senate debate against her contender, John Deaton, her challenger, John Deaton. And our polling actually showed something really incredible. It shows that having a pro-crypto stance would have a net positive impact at the polls. So 25% of Democrats said if a candidate is pro-crypto, they're much more likely to vote for them. And 21% of Republicans said the same thing. And then the opposite was very similar numbers, that if someone's pro-crypto, it would only have 2 or 3% chance of being less likely to vote for them. So Lee's exactly right that being pro-crypto is extremely costly. And you saw the head of the anti-crypto army, who literally tried to ban crypto in this past congressional session, get up in front of all her constituents and say, actually, I don't have an issue with crypto. I just want it to be regulated. Although if you look at my bill's language, I tried to ban it.
Perianne, that's interesting because it sounds like your polling actually found that there is greater support among Democrats than among Republicans. Did I understand that correctly?
By a small margin, yeah. On that particular question, yes. But Democrats and Republicans polled very, very similarly throughout the poll.
I mean, my two takeaways from the data here. Number one, the American people are far less partisan than the American Congress is. Yeah. And number two, that the second axis we probably need to measure this on, it is rather than partisanship, is simply age. I mean, I know one or two kind of like Brooklyn socialist hipsters who are super into crypto. So it's like it is a weird thing. Ken, jump in.
No, I just wanted to say I'm a Brooklyn socialist hipster. Or at least a Brooklyn hipster. I'll put the socialist aside for now. No, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Ash. If you want to continue.
And I want, if I like take off this collared shirt, just like come out like in a t-shirt, can you take me to the hipster bars? I spend all my time on the Upper East Side, man. I'm so out of the loop.
Listen, I offered a year and a half ago. We need to make it happen. Down. And we can start random crypto conversations in random Bushwick bars for sure. It's I think one thing that's been really interesting to see was what some media outlets described as a charm attack by Democrats the moment Harris was nominated. It was really stunning, like the kind of quick switch, because from a sense of like not getting a lot of attention, sometimes it being even hard to kind of get in a room with certain Democratic politicians and representatives, it completely changed. You saw a huge series, like a massive series of meetings where Harris aides and officials met with industry representatives. And, and I was present in some of those meetings, and it was really interesting to hear so many people saying, I'm a lifelong Democrat, and I simply feel like I cannot vote Democrat because this is the most important issue for me. And seeing, the Harris campaign trying to address it, I think, again, it's not a coincidence. It's because, as Perianne and Lee said, and their polls, I think, reiterate, this is really important to people. Crypto audience, I think, is interesting because it's a combination of a tech audience and finance audience, right? Which doesn't necessarily have the same values, but, generally, I'm going to make some very broad generalization. Generally, tech is, kind of left-leaning, finance, not necessarily. And I think that also maybe speak a little bit to why, we're seeing such a nonpartisan, interest in this. So it's really incredible to see democracy at work and, kind of a grassroots movement that ultimately changes how politicians that kind of seem detached, my co-panelists mentioned Elizabeth Warren, back into sense.
I think that's a really smart observation that just in the past 6 months, we've seen a huge change in the Democratic Party. I mean, the Biden and the Harris administration, their stance has been anti-crypto from the beginning. And it's been 4 years of chasing American businesses, technology businesses outside of the United States. They've set the industry back over 10 years with this aggressive regulation by enforcement agenda. They tried to shut down the Bitcoin mining industry. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on of this administration trying to be anti-crypto and being anti-crypto. But yet when it turns to election season, and I mean, these are smart people when they start to look at the polls and really understand who the American people are and what they care about, and understand that 23 million of them are in the crypto voter bloc. We saw a huge change, and that's a good thing. And I think we should recognize that progress has been made there. But for to go from completely wanting to shut the entire industry down to having Vice President Harris and now the Democrat nominee coming out and saying positive statements about crypto, that's a really big deal. That was a huge shift, and that's just in recent months.
All right, talking of this, Perianne, you bring up a very good point. We are at a moment here where the current incumbent president is no longer running. So we have the Biden-Harris administration leaving office. That's the one thing we know for certain. The question is, will it be Mr. Trump or Ms. Harris? Here's the question, is what is the expectation of change for each one of those scenarios? Lee, jump in. Tell us what you think, how you handicap it. What's the expectation of likely policy change?
Yeah, I'll start with the SEC. I think in a Trump administration, you see, of course, you can't necessarily fire Gary Gensler, but you could offer him a different post, an ambassadorship or something where he departs the SEC under pressure. Perhaps he gets demoted from the chair position and then loses all the staff, resources, and influence. So I think you immediately see Gary Gensler fade to obscurity.
Just a quick point here, and let me ask this. Lee, just for clarity, and I'm going to ask it as a general question, but the head of the SEC does not serve at the pleasure of the president. However, the precedent has been, I believe, that when the president of the United States wants to make that change, they generally resign, step down, leave in some sort of orderly fashion. Is that broadly speaking the precedent here?
Yeah, I don't know if that would remain the case, but I do think it likely would, just because of all the pressure and how miserable his life would be if he remained. He's got 2 years left in his term, so it's likely that he would step down in some way, or perhaps be ushered out through some sort of other appointment. Or like I said, he could be relegated to just one of the other commissioners, and in that case, be completely ineffective, and no one would hear from him again in all likelihood until he.
So does that mean the president has the ability to remove the chair, but not remove them from the commission itself? Is that the way that it works? What's the actual policy mechanism for setting that? Do we know?
I have heard that the president can remove the chair, and then would be unlikely, except for the precedent does state that the chair would serve, at the pleasure of the president So it's a little unclear what he would do in that case. I do think that there's not really any precedent for a president just coming in and firing an SEC commissioner on day one, especially if they had more years in their term. So some unanswered questions there, in my opinion.
I mean,
I'm certainly not an expert in this. Go ahead, Chen.
So my understanding, the commission is to become a commissioner, you need to be Senate approved, and I think oftentimes that means it's more difficult to remove folks. The chair is an executive role, right? That ultimately needs to execute policy and run operations, which again would make sense that they need to align with the administration, at least to some degree, is my understanding of it.
Here's an Axios headline. This is just literally Google because I'm not an expert at this. Quote, yes, Trump could probably remove the SEC chair. That from Axios. There's some other articles to the effect that it seems likely that a president could remove an SEC chair that he no longer wished to be in the role.
Yeah, absolutely. And even under a Harris administration, Gary Gensler is a little bit of an albatross. So I think you would see his influence wane over time. But I doubt that she would take drastic action against him. And so that's kind of the initial outlook from either the Trump or Harris administration.
Yeah, the scuttlebutt on the street in DC. I mean, obviously, the president of the United States has great powers. So there's not like a fired, the chairman of the SEC specific authority that the president has, but the chair could be demoted to commissioner, not chair, and then the chair wouldn't want to be demoted because that's a job demotion, and so they would likely just leave voluntarily. So that's one probably very likely scenario. But you're kind of asking like what ultimately would happen there. Under the Harris administration, Harris, if she were to win, she wants to have her own people in all of these roles all across the federal government. So it's my understanding that she plans to bring her own set of appointments to the table and have a whole new set of people across government, including for the chair of the SEC. We also understand that she really wants to have a person in office, or she wants the chair of the SEC to be a person of color, because we have not had a Black or a Latino American serve as the chair of the SEC before. And that's important to her. And there's a couple of names that have been leaked so far. Both of them have a background in the crypto space and have a strong knowledge of cryptocurrency. So that looks like that could be a positive development. If Trump were to win, my understanding is that President Trump would see the SEC as less important and less the leading voice for crypto regulation. And they really want to empower the CFTC, so that's the sister agency to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Of course, we all know that Bitcoin is a commodity, which is under the CFTC's jurisdiction. There's been a turf war between these two agencies of which tokens are securities, which ones are commodities. They really want to empower the CFTC to be that lead voice, that lead regulator, the lead regulator of the world for cryptocurrency regulation, and put less of an emphasis on the SEC. And now, mind you, Chairman Gensler has ran the SEC in a very, very unique way. He's really run the whole agency through the chairman's office, which has certainly been extremely controversial amongst all sorts of stakeholders, including the employees at the SEC as well. And so there's also talk that the SEC is going to be in a bit of disarray after Chairman Gensler leaves because of just the damage he has done in completely changing the way the whole agency operates, which would take many, many months, if not years, to get back in working order. So I think under a Trump administration, we'll see a lot more emphasis at the CFTC. We'll hear a lot more from the CFTC. We can expect the CFTC taking the leading role in digital asset and cryptocurrency regulation and policy, and less of a focus on SEC. Well, there'll be more of a cleanup job over there.
So what else happens when the administration changes to either former President Trump or Vice President Harris, other than CFTC, SEC chairmanships? What else are you guys keeping your finger on the pulse of?
I think one thing that I think is really important to remember is that when, sorry, I'm still on the SEC point, but one thing that's really important to remember is that when Gary Gensler was appointed, the industry celebrated. This guy was a professor for blockchain at MIT, and everyone thought that it's going to look completely different. I can't speak obviously for him or for the agency, but I think it's really important to kind of not, no matter who wins, maintain the nonpartisan standpoint that there's just a need for progress here. And that sometimes when someone goes into the role, there's politics that they need to deal with. There's a lot of kind of things in the background, and maybe just, other things that we're not aware of that, it can be hard to anticipate, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, how an appointment will exactly run things. I think one really interesting question about the SEC post-election, whatever happens there, is not only, is obviously like there's the turf war element, but also the question of enforcement. The SEC has really been kind of carrying the flag of regulation by enforcement. That's how the industry perceives it. And there's a lot of evidence out there. And I think we can probably all agree that there are a lot of cases where enforcement is necessary, where things are wrong. But I think also one of the biggest frustrations for the industry was that a lot of companies that in the absence of regulatory clarity did their best to be compliant ended up being the first one to be enforced against. And that's been just really frustrating, and obviously not something that says, that invites companies from abroad to spend time here. So, so I think, how is this going to impact enforcement is a big question mark. But I'm pretty sure we're going to see a difference with different leadership.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here on other agencies. Of course, we're all watching, there'd be a very wide divergence in who would sit in that Secretary of Treasury position. Of course, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency is very important for our industry, the Fed, the bank, essentially the bank regulators, because of this Operation 2.0, Choke Point 2.0, coined by all of our friends, Nick Carter. He's popularized that phrase. Essentially, banks are not banking digital assets companies because of pressure from the federal regulators. It's certainly not coming from the state banking regulators. Each bank has a dual regulatory environment in which the federal regulators and state regulators regulate the banks. And the federal regulators have exerted over the decades quite a bit more influence than the state regulators. They have more funding, more expertise. And I think we're watching that quite closely, as that has been it's been a choke point, and it's been a very negative issue that we've all been facing in the industry for the last several years.
Yeah, I think we've seen two very different crypto policy proposals from the Trump campaign and the Harris campaign. From Harris's side, we really don't have much of a proposal. She's issued a couple bullet points, and she said the word digital assets publicly, I think one time, which is great. She's acknowledging us, and she's, speaking about digital assets in a positive light. That's definitely a huge step from trying to completely throw us all out of the United States just a couple of months before. So that's certainly progress. But that's really not a proposal. We actually have no idea what Harris's proposal is, because they have not been transparent at all in sharing what is their agenda when it comes to digital assets. What exactly are they looking to do in a new administration? What does that mean? What kind of policies are we putting in place? Trump, on the other hand, did issue a comprehensive blockchain policy proposal publicly to the community. He first did that at the Bitcoin conference this summer in Nashville, and he outlined a very comprehensive plan where he would ensure that many different agencies would support the growth of cryptocurrency in the United States. And he's come out to say he wants the United States to be the cryptocurrency leader of the world. And so you would have the full administration really focused on empowering that, encouraging the development and the investment into blockchain technology, which is an advanced technology, which we should be doing with all advanced technologies, in my opinion. So I think there's a huge difference between these two candidates. I think if we want to talk maybe markets, something that's been more of a recent development from the Trump campaign is he's been saying maybe we'll pay off the $35 trillion in debt with crypto. He hasn't explained exactly what that means, but Bobby Kennedy did. So when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. spoke at the Bitcoin conference, he outlined his proposal when he was still in the running for president. And he said, we should buy 4 million Bitcoin. The US should buy 4 million Bitcoin and make that our strategic reserve. So I believe Trump's statements where he's saying maybe we'll pay off the debt with Bitcoin. I believe what he's doing is he's endorsing Bobby Kennedy's proposal that he laid out, now that Bobby is his running mate. Either way, for the United States,
not running mate, it's a supporter.
Sorry, he's endorsed him, and he's now supporting the campaign, and it's been widely understood he'll serve in the administration as well. But Trump did endorse a strategic Bitcoin reserve. He said we won't sell any of the crypto that we already have through all of our law enforcement seizures. We're going to hold on to that. Kennedy took it a step forward, saying, well, we're not going to sell the Bitcoin. We're going to hold all the crypto we currently have. And in addition, we should also buy more, so we have a bigger reserve. Either way, this is very bullish for game theory when it comes to Bitcoin. If you have the United States, which serves as the world reserve currency, just think about what kind of repercussions that can have on the global stage. And when people talk about Bitcoin could be at a price of 5 million by 2030 or even more, that's how you get to those types of mind-blowing numbers, when you have buyers like sovereign wealth funds, the United States of America's Treasury, making those types of purchase orders. So it's, I think the future is extremely bullish either way, but a Trump administration and a Harris administration, I do think look very different.
Anyone else want to weigh? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, just an anecdote to really echo Perianne's point about the, let's call it, light policy clarity on the Democratic side. I mentioned those, closed meetings that a lot of them were held by the Democrats, with various people, a lot of potential Democratic voters. And really, that's kind of where I personally, some of the meetings I was in felt like there's a bit of a wall that we hit when you try to get into the details. What does it mean? Like, beyond the statements being made, like, what does it mean? How do you actually see a path to legislation? I left the room feeling that most people were not fully convinced. Again, because there's not a lot of clarity there, and that obviously connects to the track record of the current administration. So,
and who wasn't fully convinced, and of what?
Sorry. So I'm describing meetings where there were various industry representatives, but I think the audience was mostly Democratic, kind of lifelong Democrat voters who come from, who are in the industry and basically say, it's very hard for me to vote Democratic based on the last few years because crypto is really important to me. There was an attempt, I mentioned this charm attack, there was an attempt to just show that things are different, they're going to be different. The candidate is making statements about digital assets and the importance of innovation. But then when questions got a bit harder, tried to go deeper, then, there wasn't a lot of, I at least didn't feel like there's, a lot of clarity of what does that mean in terms of policy, what bills, will they be supporting, what not. So that left, I felt a lot of people in those meetings feeling a bit unconvinced, or at least, not as convinced as I think many people wanted to be, because, there are, again, like a lot of those folks are, lifelong Democratic voters who really want to vote Democrat and really don't want to vote for Trump, but just find it really hard because of the policies surrounding crypto.
Lee, jump in. Any thoughts on this, what this might look like under a Vice President Harris administration if it were to land that way?
Yeah, I think from a macro markets perspective, either way, we're going to be expanding the easy money, government spending spigots, right? Under a Trump administration, that would be mostly through tax cuts, but keeping government spending the same. And under a Harris administration, it's probably expanding government spending, keeping taxes the same. or perhaps rolling back some of the Trump administration tax cuts or letting those expire. So I think either way, in the medium and long term, it's very bullish for risk assets and for Bitcoin. I do think it's unlikely that the U.S. buys 4 million Bitcoin, but what an amazing thing that would be if that happened. You could literally print dollars, the world reserve currency, to buy Bitcoin before anyone really knew what was happening. And essentially, Bitcoin becomes a part of the basket of world reserve currencies, including the dollar and the yen and the euro. And so I don't think we get anywhere in the near term about talking about Bitcoin as the world reserve currency. That's probably counterproductive for us in the halls of power. But as part of a basket of world reserve currencies, and as stablecoins proliferate, as those expand, demand for dollars and demand for treasuries, further expanding and prolonging the dollar as the world reserve currency. Of course, that won't last forever. Is it going to be 5 years or 50 years? That is all up to the choices that are made by elected officials over the next several years, and particularly in the short term, right? The debt to GDP ratio is certainly expanding and at an alarming rate. And 4 million Bitcoin in a strategic reserve would, as Bitcoin price appreciates over time, would be a pretty strong bulwark against that. We'll see if certainly that won't happen under a Harris administration, although anything's possible. The chances under Trump administration are higher, but unfortunately, I think still perhaps a little bit unlikely.
If you look at the 7-day Bitcoin chart, I don't know if we can bring that up, but that's clearly not being priced in.
Right.
U.S. buying 4 million Bitcoin, not on the 7-day Bitcoin chart.
No, it's a low likelihood event, but one that would be really bullish for the price of Bitcoin, but more importantly, bullish for the state of the U.S. economy and the fact that the dollar should remain the world reserve currency for decades to come because of the institutions that the United States has helped to foster and nurture over the last several years since the Bretton Woods Agreement that have really facilitated a world economic boom like we've never known in history. One thing that is concerning about a future Trump administration is his reliance on tariffs. Tariffs aren't inherently bad, but there are some, negative externalities with tariffs, including high inflation and other impacts that I think, certainly would be offset by 4 million Bitcoin in the strategic reserve. But I do get a little bit concerned when he talks so much about relying on tariffs to pay off the federal debt. Perhaps that's a concerning development, and maybe there's a little bit of bluster there to try to force China to do the right thing. And so if that's the case, that's probably a good strategic move. But if we're putting 100% tariffs on things, that's, any economics professor from the Keynesian school to the Austrian school in between, they will tell you that's a concerning development.
Well, I think Bitcoin is a very real potential solution to one of the biggest national security challenges our generation faces. I mean, let's not underestimate or take for granted our exorbitant privilege of living in the United States, which is the world reserve currency. It's called the exorbitant privilege for a reason. We have one of the most highest standards of living around the world in the history of the world because of our standing on the global stage. And if we lose that, if we lose our standing as the world reserve currency, this could have challenges that I think most of us can't even conceive. If we're no longer able to print money or have this status, how do we fund Medicare? How do we fund Medicaid? How do we fund Social Security? How do we fund our military? How do we fund all of these programs that so many Americans rely on and are counting on? You can't. That's a very, very real threat that our generation faces. The US dollar is under attack globally. It's not reported on in the mainstream media, I think, enough, and probably so because we don't want to scare people or bring more attention to it. But there are many, many talks around the world of many countries trying to leave the current system for one that benefits their own jurisdictions. We have a serious issue here. How do we increase the demand of the US dollar? I really don't think it's that complicated. Back it by the best performing asset in the world, which is Bitcoin. I think this is how we preserve our dominance for the next generation, for the next 100 years. I don't really think it's that complicated. And I think there's only one candidate that understands that.
Well, you're going to have a lot of difficulty finding mainstream economists who agree with you on that point about the complication of maintaining the exorbitant privilege of the U.S. dollar. But you're certainly right, Perianne, about the risks of de-dollarization, BRICS specifically being a major potential challenge to the U.S. dollar, and all of those unfunded liabilities that you mentioned there. Absolutely spot on. With that, I should say, I think we were looking at the 5-day chart on Bitcoin, not the 7-day, but basically the same. Look, the bottom line here is Bitcoin has essentially doubled over the past 12 months. It's been hovering around the $70,000 mark ever since, a little above, a little below. But that's basically where we are. No major breakouts yet in terms of the expectations of this election. And also, we should say the converse, no major crash about fears about it. That's just where we are right now. Lee, we could have a whole other conversation about trade and tariffs. That would be a fun one to do on another day. That's definitely something that is worth discussing. But for the purposes of this conversation, I want to continue to focus on digital assets. One thing that we haven't mentioned yet, haven't discussed in detail, is the composition of the U.S. Congress, whether or not you guys believe or have any insight into whether the Republicans will continue to hold the House and potentially flip the Senate. This obviously a major question from a legislative perspective. What are your thoughts on that? Who wants to jump in first? Perianne, let's start with you, since we're talking.
Yeah, I'm happy to share our thoughts on this. So on the House side, it's a bit of a toss-up. We don't really have a strong inclination if it's going to go red or blue. And there's 435 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. Every House member is up every 2 years. So everybody's out, campaigning today and has been this year. So it's a bit of a toss-up if it's going to go red or blue in the House. In the Senate, it's almost a foregone conclusion that it's going to go red with Republican control or Republican majority in the U.S. Senate. Republicans really only needed to win one additional seat. And I think Democrats were defending 23 seats and Republicans were only defending 11 seats. And most of those seats were in very strong red states where the Democrats were defending a lot more seats. Many of those looked very competitive. And it's almost a foregone conclusion that Republicans are going to take West Virginia, which would give them that one seat to get the majority. So it looks like we're going to have a Republican majority in the Senate. But hey, nobody truly knows. These are just predictions. These are polls. So I don't want to say this is definitive, but that's pretty much widely accepted amongst the politicos in DC.
Yeah, I've been reading similar points. Anyone else have any thoughts about the Congress, its constituency, and what it would mean for digital assets?
Yeah, I think the Senate going to the Republicans is a pretty big deal. Obviously, you all know confirmations in the Senate are going to be quite important. And so regardless of what administration we see in power, a Republican Senate could screen out some problematic Harris appointees, and she'd be more likely to appoint people that could be confirmed. In the House, I agree with Perianne's analysis. It's a complete toss-up. I think what really matters for our industry is the Financial Services Committee and the Ag Committee. And so not necessarily the composition of those committees, but more so the chairman and who are presiding over the committees. And so I think Chairman Waters would be quite different than a Chairman French Hill or someone from the Republican side. Although, less damaging than Senate Banking Committee Sherrod Brown has been. I think, with Sherrod Brown, with the Democrats losing control of the Senate and him losing some power in that committee, that bodes very well. And it also takes the wind out of, the person that we probably mentioned the most up here, takes the wind out of the sails of Senator Elizabeth Warren, because she will then be sitting on a committee with less Democrat influence and pretty much be relegated to the sidelines for the next several years.
Something, again, I'll go back to my nonpartisan point. I just think it's critical. I think that no matter what happens, it's going to look a little bit different. One way or another, it's gonna be, it's gonna be it's gonna be tight, right? Both houses, whatever side wins will need the other side in order to advance constructive legislation. And my hope is that even if let's say the industry doesn't get the chairs they want for UG or financial services or Senate banking, is that there's going to be more opportunity to, there's going to be more, ability to work across the aisle. I had the distinct pleasure of hosting a fireside chat with Majority Whip Congressman Tom Emmer of Minnesota. And he, obviously a very prominent Republican, obviously a partisan figure, but it was incredible to hear him talk about not only how much he believes in the importance of nonpartisanship on this issue, but also on how much he's seeing activity and more interest on the Democratic side. That he's seeing a lot of Democratic congressmen that are keen to work with Republicans on this. And I hope that ultimately, again, whoever wins, I'm sure that there are going to be some committees where the industry gets who they want, maybe others are not. But whoever wins, we're going to see more of that, nonpartisan spirit to just say this is too important to not finally get some legislation in place so the industry gets the clarity it needs. It was really, really encouraging for me to hear this from Majority Whip Emmer, just like it was encouraging to hear, for example, for the first time, as part of the Democratic charm attack I mentioned earlier, Senate Majority Leader, the current one, Chuck Schumer, saying he believes it's possible to pass legislation this year. So you're seeing across the board just an openness and sort of an understanding that it's ridiculous. Something needs to happen. And I hope that whatever the results are, that will play an important role, that nonpartisanship.
So is it fair to say that everyone on this panel is broadly constructive about the changes that are going to come in terms of the switch of administration and the change potentially in leadership in Congress, but certainly in some members that are going to be changing? Does everyone on this panel believe that we are just moving forward here in terms of advancing? The question being just at what speed, at what pace that happens.
I think that's fair. I also don't think it can get any worse than the Biden-Harris administration. So, there's also a very low bar of what progress looks like right now. But look, this is just technological progress. Again, crypto should have never become a partisan issue. It's only been a partisan issue for a couple of years. This is about technology. This is an advanced technology. It's critical that the U.S. is at the forefront of all advanced technologies. Of course, blockchain is one among those. And that's really, I think logic and reason are eventually going to persist as people understand better that this is just technology. This is not politics. Let's get the politics out of this. I think over time, we will have more progress in terms of, pro crypto and pro blockchain policy. But we still have a long way to go, to achieve that goal of making the U.S. the leader of the blockchain industry. There's definitely a lot to do, but it's still within our reach.
Yeah, I think the medium to long term prospects are really great. The short term, we're advancing, as you said, Ash. Whether we're advancing in a Honda or on a SpaceX rocket kind of depends on what happens today.
I'll add to that yes, I agree. I think Perianne's point is actually an important one. Like the bar is really low, so it's really hard to see how it won't improve, even with just a little bit more goodwill on both sides. I think that the U.S. actually has a really incredible second mover opportunity here, because people who work in America, live in America, Americans, and the world has kind of been working with this reality where the US is behind on one of the most exciting technologies out there. I think there's an opportunity to turn it into an advantage, because in the time that passed, part of the frustration is that in so many other jurisdictions around the world, there is clarity, or at least more clarity. There are regulators who work really closely with the industry in order to find constructive solutions. It doesn't mean that they don't enforce when need be, but at least they engage and provide that clarity. And the US now has a bank of case studies, legislators here have a bank of case studies they could look around the world of what works best and what will work best for the U.S. So it's really important. I'm an eternal optimist, and I really feel that in a few years, with a bit more clarity, as the majority whip Emmer said in the conversation I had with him, we're going to be talking about what's next in a year from now. I hope he's right.
And since you bring it up, talking about legislation, and listen, this is just probably my own ignorance. I'm a New York finance guy. I'm not a DC policy wonk. Somebody walk me through what happens when you have an election. What's the status of the pending legislation right now around crypto? How is it likely to change going forward? And how do you guys feel that the pending legislation, the legislation that's about to potentially come to the floor, might affect the current state of play in the crypto space?
So there's really two pieces of legislation out of dozens, if not over 100. There's been a lot of legislation introduced in the current Congress related to digital assets, but there's really kind of two that have taken center stage. One is what we call market structure. So that's really creating that comprehensive regulatory framework for digital assets. And it addresses the SEC's jurisdiction and the CFTC's jurisdiction. Because again, there's been a bit of a turf war between those two agencies. There's been regulation by enforcement out of both of those agencies, more so the SEC, not so much at the CFTC, but a little bit. And not having that regulatory clarity is critical. Businesses can't build, develop, innovate if they don't understand what the rules to the road are. And that's why so many companies have just left the US altogether over the past 4 years. So market structure is the legislation that's really aims to solve that, bring that regulatory clarity, really define each agency's role, and set out the regulatory regime for cryptocurrency markets. So that bill passed the House with overwhelming bipartisan support this summer. The name of the bill was the Fit for the 21st Century Act. It has not been introduced in the Senate. You have different versions of market structure, like the Lummis-Gillibrand Responsible Financial Innovation Act being the main one. But because we don't have a companion bill, and you still have to, get it through the Senate may have their own version. You have to reconcile that. You have to get support from the president. The president's already vetoed digital asset legislation this year. It's a long, there's just a lot that has to happen. And I think there's only 14 days on the congressional calendar this year. So I think the likelihood of all those things coming together is just unlikely. Not that it couldn't happen, but it's a long shot. The other bill is the stablecoin bill. So there's federal legislation that's been introduced in both the House and the Senate that would create a federal license for stablecoin issuers. The House and the Senate versions look a little bit different. So again, you have to reconcile those two bills, get them passed through both the House and the Senate and signed by the president. Those conversations are not dead. The negotiations between those stakeholders, House, Senate, the administration. So there is still work underway to try to get a stablecoin bill passed. In fact, I'll be in DC all next week talking about the stablecoin bill when they're back in session after the election. So that's forefront of the conversation. But again, we only have a couple weeks to get it done, and a lot has to happen in a short amount of time. And Congress has other things they need to do. They need to pass their NDAA, the Defense Authorization Act, as well as a funding bill before the calendar runs out. So it's probably more possible, Ash, that we will reconvene next year when we start the 119th congressional session, and we'll be starting all over again. And the congressional sessions are 2 years. So at the end of this year, that completes the congressional session. So any bills that were not passed are they die is probably a bad term, but all those bills die. They have to be reintroduced and start all over again from the very beginning in their legislative process. So this is an ongoing conversation. I would expect to continue talking about crypto legislation well into 2025 and 2026. But a lot of progress was made in these bills. I mean, we have really good, solid text. There's still some things to work out, but both these pieces of legislation have a lot of support to get done.
Perianne, it's always super helpful when you come on the show to remind me of how little I understand our legislative process in this country and how complicated it is. And I think probably most people don't really understand it.
Politics. I was talking about logic and reason earlier, and something I always say is like logic and reason don't always persist in politics. I think the politicians likes to overcomplicate things, but getting something through Congress, an act of Congress, is probably the hardest thing we will ever have to do as an industry. It's you have 535 members across both House and Senate. It's a lot to have to deal with. So it's not something that happens overnight. Any legislation takes years. And it's way more complex than it needs to be.
Anyone else have any other thoughts on the legislation currently before Congress and that might be before Congress in the coming months and years?
Yeah, I think in the lame duck, if we had poly market odds on it, it'd probably be less than 10% of getting anything through, probably less than 1% for market structure. The stablecoin legislation has a little bit of breath left in it, but I agree with Perianne. It's extremely unlikely.
You're talking about, just for people who may not know, myself being one of them, you're talking about between November and January.
Correct. Yeah. So just in that lame duck period, it's very unlikely that we'd see anything get through, especially in the event that there is a Trump administration that's coming in January. That lame duck period looks quite contentious, in my opinion. So unlikely to see anything there. I think, you said it well, Ash, and my fellow panelists did as well. It is very difficult to get bills. I mean, Congress is built for bills to die, and depending on which Congress we're talking about, the 118th, 117th, whatever. Typically it's like less than 1% of bills that get filed are passed, and in state legislatures it's similar. It's a little bit better. You're ranging from like 4 to 8%, but getting a bill passed is like rolling a boulder up a mountain. And so I think the industry 5 years ago thought, you know what, let's just continue to build. It's too hard to change things in DC. And it's very clear over the last several years that our thinking on that has rightly shifted to, we need to roll up our sleeves, get involved, not only with the political process, but with the policy process and education process as well. And things are not going to just get better on their own. They're only going to get better after extreme amounts of blood, sweat, and tears. Probably not the right analogy to use, but a lot of hard work. And I think the industry has done quite a bit over, especially the last 12 months. And we have a very important upcoming year in the 119th Congress to ensure that these bills are on the right footing to be passed later in 2025 or early in 2026 is a pretty good window.
Ken, any thoughts?
I mean, I think that I'm a big believer that we tend to overestimate what can be done in a year and underestimate what can be done in 10 years. And we, especially in today's environment, our heads kind of turn with headlines and we feel like everything is going to happen immediately. I just don't think that's the right approach. I agree with both Perianne and Lee. We shouldn't expect things to happen immediately, but what I hope to see is really dramatic change in the direction of things that will ultimately lead to better results very soon. Look, one way or another, Congress is going to have to deal with our industry and its legislation for a long time, because in the US, some very basic pieces are still missing. Stablecoins, like Perianne mentioned, like basic market structure concepts. There's a whole other wave coming, right? DeFi, staking, block building, Web3. There's going to be a need here for evolving policy. If you look at MiCA in Europe, for example, it doesn't cover DeFi, but at least the industry there feels like now they know what they need to do in order to not get sued. So I agree that it's not going to happen immediately, but I believe things are going to start happening much faster. And that ultimately in a year from now, we're going to be in a much better place, I hope.
Yeah. I'm just looking here at X. Here's a tweet coming out of Real Clear Politics just before we went live on this show. Trump projected to retake White House. Boy, that's a gutsy call, I have to say. As we sit here waiting, the American people, voters, have a way of making fools out of talking heads and pollsters. So I guess we're going to have to see on that. Let's go around the horn here, just get final thoughts on this moment of uncertainty, where we are. Let's try and get a little bit of clarity from each of you. Perianne, first over to you. Final thoughts, key takeaways.
Is it possible to move that 1 year to the 5 year? Can we show the 5 year chart?
On Bitcoin?
Yeah, there we go. All right. So Maybe let's just end on a really positive note. This is an extremely positive chart on the price of Bitcoin over the past 5 years. So Bitcoin operates in a 4-year halving cycle, and the markets usually are 4 years. So we have a 3-year cup pattern down there, and we've been basing for about 6 months, and we've had multiple new all-time highs. This is an extremely, extremely bullish chart for the future of Bitcoin. Bitcoin typically has its bull run 12 to 18 months after the halving. So we are, or the best time to own Bitcoin is the 12 to 18 months. That's when the bull runs typically start. So the chart really supports that as well. So I think I don't think Bitcoin cares if you're a Democrat or if you're a Republican. Bitcoin doesn't care about politics. Bitcoin shows up and it does the same thing it does every day. It runs the software. We mine new Bitcoin every day, and more people are learning about this technology. And the more people that come in, the more the price goes up. So I'm excited to see where Bitcoin's going to go, regardless of who wins. And the charts show us a very, very bright future.
Well, that's very well said, Perianne. But you do, of course, bring out my internal desire to always bring balance to the conversation. If you bought in November of 21 around 65, you got absolutely whacked. If you sold in 2022 when it lost 75% of its value.
Got to hodl. Number one rule of Bitcoin, hodl.
Lee, over to you.
Yeah, I love the quote that Chen brought up earlier. Bill Gates, said, I think most popularly popularized this phrase that we underestimate what we can do in one year, or overestimate what we can do in 1 year and underestimate what we can do in 5. And so I really think that's the name of the game. We have exciting times ahead for the digital assets industry, and the next 24 hours, I think, is bigger than just the digital assets industry. It's democracy in America, and let's hope and pray for a peaceful transition of power to either a Harris or Trump administration in January, and some clarity in the next say week as to what happens in this election. I think we've got certainly bigger problems ahead of us if information is twisted and if things are not clear to the American people and transparency isn't at the forefront. And it's such an important point for Bitcoin too. I mean, Bitcoin is it's the quintessential transparent asset. And that's exactly what we need in our democracy right now as well. It's just people have to trust the process. And you can certainly trust Bitcoin because you can see the code and you can see the blocks being formed. And it's extremely sort of telling. Another point to the adoption curve that we're seeing, A16Z put out an incredible survey that showed global wallet adoption over the last year, proceeding at the same pace as the internet, the adoption of the internet. And I think that is profound. And we are it's still in early days. People are going to have wallets embedded in all sorts of software. I mean, we're already seeing AI transacting in wallets on Coinbase's Base platform. And last thing I'll say about the election in specific is you've got all sorts of great initiatives going on, Stand with Crypto, the Bitcoin Voter Project. There are people galvanizing and activating the digital asset voter. Perianne's survey demonstrated that in its full extent. And yeah, it's exciting to see. And, I'll be at home watching, with my wife and eating some popcorn. It's going to be an exciting night. And hopefully by midnight, we'll have at least some sort of idea where this thing is headed.
Don't bet on it, Lee.
I know, right?
Well, we may underestimate what we can do in a year. We should never underestimate what we can do in an hour. This has been a great conversation. Amazing debut appearance by you, Lee. I'm sure you'll be coming back soon. Chen, I'm going to leave this over to you to take us out. Final thoughts, key takeaways.
Well, I guess as the guy with an accent and a ch in his name, which may or may not indicate I wasn't born here, I'll repeat to the point I said in the beginning. The world is watching. The world is watching not just for crypto. I completely agree with Lee. This is much bigger than that. It's about democracy. It's about executing your vote, and it's also about understanding whatever the results are. That we're all in this together. We're neighbors. We're communities. We need to continue working together. That non-partisanship spirit is, to me, the most important thing the crypto industry needs to stick to as it continues its efforts. After the election, I believe we're going to have a much more receptive audience, and we're going to see we're going to have much more constructive conversations. We're going to see progress. Thanks so much, Ash. It was great to be here.
And speaking of communities, someday you're going to have to teach me how to take the 6 train to Bushwick. I think I get that.
I already added to my to-do list. Make sure Ash sees the inside of a bar in Bushwick.
I think we can all agree on that. Perianne and Lee, thanks for joining us. This has been a great conversation, obviously on an important day in American history. That's it for now. Chris Bullock will be back with his TA show at 1 p.m. Eastern time today to walk you through all the price action. Make sure to tune in. I'll be back tomorrow with the latest crypto distillery. And don't forget, tickets are now up for sale for the in-person crypto gathering in Miami. Head over to realvision.com/CG2025. That's realvision.com/CG2025 to get yours. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See you all soon.
Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. Look, if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button and check out the video here on the right-hand side. I'm sure you'll enjoy that one as well. And if you're ready for more, go to realvision.com/join. I'll see you there.